This is an instructional on how to use a key portion of this Outlaw Scientist MCAT Physics Prep. This planner comes with 3 sections. So it's your calendar planner. Okay, the second section is your progress planner. So for instance, you'll see here test 1. We'll see your first pass, second pass, third pass. So your first pass is always the most important. And there's check boxes here for 1x or 1.5x. So 1x is the full amount of time to take those questions, that portion of the test. 1.5x is if you speed yourself up. So after you've learned to take it, you then go through the same test, the ones that you already know how to do in many cases, and you give yourself half as much time. And that forces you to find shortcuts, to think quicker, so that when you take the actual test, you won't run out of time, and you'll be able to answer as many of these as possible. And then the last portion is your progress planner. So here's how to do it step by step. First thing you do is you look for you find yourself a little calendar, and let's say your test date is, I'm just picking, this is probably not a real test date, but I'll say your test date is September 24th. Okay, so I fill in the test date of September 24, 2015, and let's say I'm going to start studying on, let's say July 4th, Independence Day. I'll watch some fireworks, come back in, I'll start studying on July 4th. So I fill that in, July 4th, 2015. And then I look at my calendar, and I say, well, let's see here. We have most of the month of July, month of August, month of September. There's 3 months. Not too bad, not too shabby amount of time to prep. Ideally, we'll have even more than that. So my first date, we'll say, will be 7/4/15. And I'm going to take test 1 and point 1, so that's my first try. And that's what I plan on doing during week 1, and I'm going to give myself some retests. So I'm going to look at the retest later. Okay, so we have 12 weeks to prepare, so we're going to use 12 of these boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So these boxes, unfortunately, I'm not going to have time to get to. You can see why it's better if you have more time to prepare, because then you have more time to learn this. But that's okay. Let's say I'm doing, say, 6 tests. Ideally, we're going to do 8 tests. But let's say with the stretch incentives, it gets to 6 tests. So then we have 1 test, 2 tests, 3 tests, 4 tests, 5 tests, 6 tests. Okay, so this would be test 2. That's test 2, still test 1. Test 3, test 3, test 4, test 4, test 5, test 5, test 6, test 6. Okay. You might want to give yourself an extra week just so you can go back and redo some of this, because ideally you're going to go back and redo some of these tests. But this is functional. So in the first one of these is always the more important one, because this is the first look at it. The first look at these tests is always the most important. Why? Because when you take the physics MCAT, or the MCAT, the physics portion of it, that's going to be the first time you see that test. After you see our practice test the second time, it's no longer as valuable as it was the first time. Okay, so and then I'll fill in dates for these. And let's say I know my test is going to be at 5 in the afternoon. Let's say 3 in the afternoon. I'm going to plan to take my tests, if possible, with my work schedule and school schedule, as close to the same time of day as possible, because that goes on the principle of test like you train and train like you test. So we're going to practice in the same way that our actual test is going to be. If we take our test every night at midnight, and our test is actually going to be at noon, that's not really preparing us in the right kind of way. We might be really tired at noon. We might be full of energy at midnight. Well, that we need to get used to taking that test at noon. So say this one is on the 16th. So we're saying 7/16. Skip a week, there's 7/30. And see, July, August. Okay, so we're at, skip a week to the 14th. So 8/14, 8/28, see here, 8/28, skip a week to 9/11, okay, And we have some retest time in there. But that's my basic. Now I can say interpolate here. Well, say 14. So we'll find the dates to go in here. You can figure it out. The point is, you're setting up a schedule, ideally, and we understand things might change. You understand things might change. This is just a rough blueprint. Okay? When you have a plan, you can modify it as needed, but this is just a goal of something to stick by. Okay, now, we'll move down to this section. Let's say I take my test here. Let's say I take my first test, and my first score, on my first try through, I got 10 right, and let's say I got 15 wrong. Okay, so I have a raw score of 10. Okay. These, you could just put your raw score down, but these are important. The right and wrong ones are important because if you get one of our higher incentives, we might use that for tracking your progress, of getting an idea of how much you actually get a chance to attempt. Let's say, for instance, you had 10 right and 10 wrong. You didn't even get a chance. You didn't have time to look at 5 of them. That's important. That's something we need to know. And obviously, for your first time, you're doing it at 1 times the speed because that's the way you're going to take the test. Okay, and that's your score, 10. Let's say the second time, well, we go through our answers, we check it out, we learn how to do it. Let's say the second time we get 20 right and 5 wrong for a new score of 20. That's great. Let's say we did that at 1x. Now we're getting pretty confident. We'll take it again. This time we're going to do it at double speed. And let's say this time we got 18 right, and let's say we got 4 wrong, and we didn't even get a chance to get the last 2. We just ran out of time, say. By the way, it doesn't hurt if you're running out of time. Plot for it. Just run through and guess. Because the MCAT, unlike the GRE, does not count wrong answers against you. At least not the most recent iteration of this. Check your MCAT rules, but the last time we checked, they didn't hold wrong answers against you. Okay, so you'll go through this, and we're going to plot it. So we have our first pass 1 was... Let's plot that. By the way, you're going to go through these. Now, you might be on your test 4 and say, hey, this is a good time for me to go back to test 1 and retake it. Let's say I have a little bit of time on a Tuesday afternoon. I want to go back, and let's say I'm an expert in test 1. Go back and retake old tests. That's important. You might want to do it at double time just so you don't use as much time. It also stresses you a little bit. But go back and retake old tests because it reinforces that. You'll see a lot of similarities from one test to the next. And when you take your actual MCAT, you'll see that a lot of the new problems you take on the MCAT are very similar to these problems. And there's a reason for that. The reason for that is the people who've written this test, namely us, have written test questions in the back of physics textbooks that are made in some cases by some of the same people who are involved in the writing of these test questions for the MCAT. Okay, I mean, I can't list names. I don't even know. I mean, some of it's very private. But these companies hire known physicists to write these questions. Okay, and there's a reason for that. They're difficult to write. You don't want to make them too hard. You don't want to make them too easy. They have to be tested. So, okay, so I'm going to plot this. So we have 1, and our score was 10. So I put a dot there. And this will be a work in progress. You'll go through you'll go through this chart as you go through your test prep. Our second attempt, we got 20. I'll probably get something like that. On the next test, I might get a little bit higher. It'll probably look something like this. With my eventual goal being I'm getting really good at doing physics. Okay, but I can say as a physicist, the questions on the MCAT are deceptively difficult. If you are not completely confident about your physics and you look at those questions on your sample MCATs and you say, oh my goodness, these are easy, in my opinion, as a professional practicing physicist, you might be looking at some of them wrong. And some of these questions are designed to look simple and they hide a level of complexity that you'll only see if you get good at it in practice. Okay, so that's how this works. Thank you for watching, and I hope you back the Kickstarter. Your help will be greatly appreciated.